Come hang out in the studio with us. I have planned to do this big opus of a YouTube series on metalworking for non-professionals. You know, artists and craftspeople, people that are not going to make welding their income. Because a lot of the instructors on YouTube, and there's fantastic instructors, they are professionals. They are structural pipe welders, boiler makers, you know, those kinds of people. And that's great. But I think having an artist teach you welding is a different point of view. And coming at welding from an art point of view it's a good point of view. It's just different. And I think it might work. I think it would be beneficial. So really, when you're trying to get into welding for your creative endeavors, there's two main types of welders you should look for: MIG and TIG. MIG stands for metal inert gas. Doesn't matter. But MIG basically is like the hot glue gun of the welding world. Inside your MIG welder, there's a spool of wire, and you can purchase different wires for different purposes, but traditionally just start off with steel, you know. That wire goes through this hose, out your MIG gun here, and then out the tip. There's a couple different kinds of wire. There's what they call self-shielded or flux core wire. That's really good for welding outside. Like if you're trying to fix a tractor on a windy day with a MIG gun, you could use flux core wire. I'm not a fan of it. It is not, in my opinion, a good place to start. You want gas shielded MIG. So when you're selecting a MIG welder, you want to choose a gas shielded MIG welder, and probably I would say one that is inverter based. These new sort of inverter based welders are very efficient, and they have, like my Fronius Transsteel has a setting called Synergic. Some of the other brands have different names, but the Synergic mode simplifies the whole process. You tell the welder what size wire you're using, what material you're welding on, what kind of gas you have, and it figures out 90% of the equation of a good weld for you, and you just dial in your amperage or your voltage. But at the very, very basic level, this wire comes out the end like that, creates a electrical contact with your workpiece. Your workpiece is grounded with a grounding clamp like this. It creates an electrical connection, and it short circuits or arcs. And the intensity of that arc heats up the metal. And then the gas that you've connected to the back of the welder comes through this hose out the tip. And the reason why you need gas is when you're welding, you're heating the metal up to critical temperatures. So it is like, you know, it's getting super hot. And like a human, when they get super hot, they get reactive. And so the metal becomes very reactive with air. The shielding gas creates a little protective environment for your weld that keeps oxygen away, because when oxygen gets to molten metal, it penetrates the metal, and it really contaminates it, and it fouls it. And you'll know if you don't have your gas turned on, or if the wind blows your gas away, the metal, the weld will look like almost like lava rock. It'll be all porous and foamy. It will not be a solid weld. That's why when I was saying outside, you'd use a flux core machine, because when the wire actually produces its own gas, it's less likely to be blown away than a gas shielded MIG. But for our purposes, for doing stuff like this in a studio, Gas shielded MIG is fantastic. It's where I started. I would say in the spectrum of welders, on the far end you have torch welding. Like this. You can take an oxygen acetylene. This is an oxygen propane torch. Now this is not a welding torch. This is kind of a rosebud torch for heating up. But this is where you could start. And basically, you know, you're putting heat into the workpiece and getting the workpiece to melting temperature, critical temperature, and then you're adding a filler rod like this to that molten puddle to join it together. Your filler rod is usually the same material as your parent material. What they call your parent material is the material you're welding. So you have your parent material and then your filler material. So that's on the far end is torch welding. And honestly, I think everyone should learn to torch weld. I know personally I need to really practice and get better at torch welding, but that's a really good skill to have. So you have torch welding or oxy-fuel welding on the far end. And then I'd say the next thing you have is stick welding. Stick welding is a fantastic way to weld, and it's great for welding outside. It's most pipe welders, when you do like gas pipeline outside, they do stick welding. Now they also do TIG welding, but stick welding is for heavier type materials, thicker metals, and it's just more rough. As we move down this line here, we're going to get more refined and more refined. So oxy-fuel welding, stick welding. Stick welding would not work for what I do. And then you have MIG welding. MIG welding is, in my opinion, the most versatile. If you get a powerful enough MIG welder and you hook it up to 220, like a 30 or 50 amp circuit, you can dial it up, and if you get a thick enough wire, like a if you get like a 0.045 wire, you can weld some really thick stuff. You can do heavy work with a MIG gun. Also, if you go the other way, if you get like my Transsteel, which is an inverter-based welder, if you dial it down and you get a 0.023 wire, which is the smallest MIG wire, you can really do some delicate work, which I really like. Hi, future Jason here. I was watching this back as I was editing it, and I was thinking, I kept saying that MIG is the most versatile. That's not actually accurate, now that I think about it. What I should say is MIG is the most versatile for the beginner because you can do so much with it. If you actually look at how all of the different things you can weld, I would say TIG is the most versatile. All the different materials that can be welded with TIG far outstrip and outpass what can be welded with MIG. But for the beginner, MIG covers a lot of bases. Yeah, I was watching this back, I was like, that's not 100% accurate. I like MIG, and MIG is very versatile, but if you really want the most versatile welder for both thick and thin, TIG's the way to go. So yeah, just short break to correct myself. All right. One of the reasons why I like MIG so much is because it's a one-handed operation. So if I'm working on a piece of art, I can hold it with one hand, and I can use the MIG gun with the other hand and do a bead like that, or pop a small little weld like that. There are some negatives though, because you're constantly applying filler material, because on your MIG weld, this wire is your filler material. Can you hear that? The gas coming out? I have it turned on now just so you can hear it. Because you're constantly applying filler material, and you can control that speed on your welder, you control the wire speed and your voltage and amperage. That's why I like the Synergic mode so much, because it knows what wire speed works the best for the amperage, so it just leaves you with one knob to mess with. I like that. What I was saying, when you're welding with MIG, it leaves a glob of weld. It leaves like a glob. There is no option for what's called fusion welding. Now, fusion welding is where you take the parent material and you just fuse it together. You don't add any filler material. And that is where TIG comes in. So as we move down the line, we started off with oxyfuel, stick, MIG, which is the most versatile. You can do delicate and really thick stuff. Then you go to TIG. TIG welding. This is what I would say is the surgeon's scalpel of the welding world. You have a TIG torch. This is a TIG torch. And basically this torch applies heat to your workpiece, kind of like the oxygen fuel setup, but instead of using burning oxygen fuel, it uses electricity. And the first time I TIG welded, the thought entered my mind, and it really hit me. This is the closest you could ever get, I think, to holding a little star in your hand. And what I mean is when you're TIG welding, the light is very intense, it's very bright, and the arc between your electrode, now on your TIG welder, inside this cup, there is an electrode which is made of tungsten. This electrode is different than the MIG electrode in the fact that this electrode is part of the filler material. It is the filler material. It is the filler material. So it actually comes down, touches your workpiece, short circuits, generates heat, and then melts. So it's constantly like a hot glue gun coming out, melting, and being deposited on your parent material. TIG isn't like that. TIG is just a very controllable source of heat. And when your torch is right above your workpiece and you strike an arc, it's very much like holding a star in your hand. It's this bright, intense light, and you can move that little intense point of light and heat over your parent material, and using a foot control or a hand control, you can raise the amperage up and increase the heat. And then once you have that little puddle, that little area of your parent material right to the point of melting, then you can take your filler material and you can add to it if you choose and work your way down. And that's where the skill is. It's easy to strike an arc with a TIG welder. It's difficult to learn how much heat and how to hold the torch for different materials. You have thin materials that require a little bit of heat. You have thick materials which require a lot of heat. Some even require preheat. So it's a delicate dance, and it's one that I'm still mastering for sure. I'm not the best TIG welder. But because you don't have that wire coming out, you can do what's called fusion welding, which is primarily what I do. If I have a piece like this, a small piece that I want to attach, like a greebly on one of my spaceships, I don't want this big glob of weld on each end of it because it changes the shape of the detail, you know? And it's been a problem. So I've been learning TIG, and you'll see guys wrap the torch around their arm. It puts the weight of the hose over your shoulder because this torch is water cooled. So in this torch, there is several hoses. One is gas, because there is gas that comes out of the end of this, and there's also 2 loops of water. And the water is what keeps this torch cool. And the water-cooled torch, it's the best, in my opinion, because you can, with a pair of gloves on, you can really choke up on it and grab it right toward the end here. Now, if you're doing a lot of heavy, hot work, thick material, you can't grab the torch. It's going to get too hot. That's why you have, this big handle back here. But for what I do, really detailed stuff, it allows me to get like right in on the work. And then I can do what's called a fusion weld, where I'll hold the piece I want to weld down, and I'll strike an arc and just fuse the two together. And while it does leave a little area that's been welded, it doesn't leave the big glob of weld on it. Yeah. I'll tell you what, it's hard to express to someone who is a non-welder what learning to weld can do for you. We're surrounded by metal. Computers, phones, cars, your house. Metal is everywhere. And if you actually look back through history, mankind, humankind, let me say the right word, humankind, it's built upon metal. Modern human civilization, there you go, is built upon metal. And when we went from the Stone Age to the Bronze Age, started using bronze to make tools, and then we discovered, iron, and then made steel. Our modern civilization, from electronics all the way through to just tools, would not be possible without metal. And then if you can learn to work in that metal, to manipulate it, to join it, to cut it, metalworking, it opens up a whole world of possibilities that you honestly didn't know existed previously. I am on, personally, a metalworking journey. I feel comfortable with MIG. I'm learning TIG. And when you get into TIG, you can switch polarity, and you can switch whether you're doing DC direct current or AC. So you can do aluminum. And because this is a torch, a heat generating object, you can also use it for TIG brazing with silicon bronze. And I've done some TIG brazing. It's extremely versatile. My point is, once you get into metalworking and you start creating with it, it unlocks so many possibilities. So even if you're like a cosplayer or a prop maker, and you're dealing with expanded foam or polystyrene, or I can't think of, there's a thin plastic that you can buy for model making. If you move from that into metal, the things you can create, the structures you can build off of, the skeletal structure you can create for like a prop or a set of wings or a cosplay, it is so worth your time and worth your money to get a place. And that's the one drawback. It's worth your time and money to learn this, but the one drawback about this is you have to have a place to do it, and you can't necessarily do it inside your house. You need something with like a concrete floor, especially if you're going to be working with MIG. Now, believe it or not, TIG is so delicate and so refined that you could TIG inside. If you had a basement room that was drywall and didn't have carpet, you could TIG in your house safely. You have to be careful and respectful, but you could TIG in your house. I would not MIG in your home. MIG is too sparky and too much, but you could TIG in your house. So that's the idea. If you're thinking, well, my space is limited, I want to pick up a welder, you could do TIG. Nothing wrong with learning TIG or starting with TIG. My recommendation is start with MIG, but TIG is a good place to go. And I guess to end it all, there is, or to round out this lineup, there's laser welding. Laser welding it's kind of, a lot of jewelers use laser welding. It's even more refined. It's a pulse type welding for really, really small stuff. So yeah, there's even one step further of refinement and precision when you get down to micro welding. There's a couple different types of micro welders. They'll actually have kind of like a stereo microscope that you can put your workpiece, which could be extremely small, like human hair width type stuff, and then they'll weld it and fuse it. Pretty cool stuff. I think Sunstone Welders makes one. I've wanted one. So yeah, you can choose where you want to be in welding. Do you want to be on the micro side, really tiny stuff, which I kind of lean that way, but I also, some of my stuff's pretty thick, so I tend to fall right here. This is where I think I need to be. Yeah, combination of both. My plan is, my earpiece keeps coming off. I'm going to have to adjust this. My plan is to create a multi-part, really in-depth YouTube series on metalworking for total beginners. Metalworking for non-professionals. I think the first episode is going to be something like just metal in general. What types of metal, brass, copper, bronze, aluminum, steel, stainless, titanium. What can you weld, what can't you weld, what can you braze, the history of that kind of stuff. And that video is not for everybody, but if you're interested and you want to learn about the history of metal and all that stuff, I think it's a good place to start, but I don't think it's a prerequisite. Then the next one I thought would be like cutting metal, like what different ways to cut it, shape it, grind it, different types of abrasives and stuff, maybe safety in the metal workshop. And then step on to welding, which that's a big episode. And then brazing, I want to get into casting. So I want to dive deep. So it'll be intensive and full of detail and examples. And it'll take me a while, but it's going to come at you from the point of view of the artist, hobbyist, the craft, the creative soul, not the professional. And there's nothing wrong with the professional, but the professional, they have restrictions and requirements that they have to pass for a particular weld, and they'll be reading blueprints, and they'll be trying to, their requirements are different than the artist requirements. So yeah, that's coming. I was just hanging around the shop today. I keep saying shop. I gotta stop that. I was hanging around the studio today. I was doing some cleaning up, and I thought, let's just sit down and have a chat. Hang out with me in the shop. I had the dogs out with me for a little while, but I gotta bring them in. We've had some mice out in the yard, and the dogs are digging up where they live, and so yeah. If you have any areas you'd like me to cover or questions specifically that you want to know, I've already released this sort of question on Instagram. Let me know in the comments, and I'm sort of collecting and gathering information and questions, topics to address. This video series will probably come out next year. I'll probably start filming this year, but it's going to take me a few months to get the curriculum polished up and correct, and then get it filmed, and then edited, and then released. I'll probably release it all at once. That way people aren't waiting for the next one. I don't know. I might do it part by part. Either way, yeah. I think I'm gonna have some lunch and check. I'm on call 24/7, so I gotta check the board. See if when I get called into work. You guys have a fantastic day. We'll catch you later.